The plant is portal. An ancestral perspective on cannabis. Cannabis, this plant now banalized, criminalized, and romanticized, was, in many traditions, a sacred key. And keys, as we know, are not made to be worshipped. They are made to open doors. But which doors? In ancient India, Arva called it one of the 5 sacred plants of the earth, described as a gift from the gods, bearer of Amrita, the nectar of immortality. Its direct association with Shiva, the destroyer and regenerator, is no coincidence. Shiva is the master of the cosmic dance, the one who dissolves illusion. His devotees, the sadhus, smoked it in clay chilams during long meditations, but always as part of a ritual: fasting, chants, isolation. They did not seek a high, but the death of the ego, the end of identification with the body. Cannabis was not an escape, it was a confrontation. In the East, Taoist masters saw the plant as an ally of longevity and spiritual vision. Records by the alchemist Geihong and Bao Puzi describe combinations with jineng and other herbs that induced lucid dreams and expanded consciousness. In Taoism, every substance has qi, vital energy. Cannabis, when harmonized with the body, could refine this flow, but when used by an unbalanced body, it worsened internal chaos. It amplifies, and like any amplifier, it is dangerous if the instrument is not tuned. In the Muslim Arab world, certain branches of medieval Sufism also used the plant, especially hashish, in their rituals. For the Sufis, the supreme goal was fana, the dissolution of the ego, the annihilation of the self in the presence of the divine. Many reports speak of mystical ecstasies, of visions of the divine beloved, but even among Sufi masters, there were controversies. The great poet and mystic Rumi warned, "Why seek God in intoxication if he already dances sober within you?" The plant was used with moderation and reverence. When it ceased to be a bridge and became a crutch, it was abandoned. Among the mystical Jews of Kabbalah, there is no direct mention of cannabis, perhaps due to cultural context, perhaps caution, but a recurring wisdom echoes. The Zohar warns that those who force the portals of light without preparation will be devoured by their own ignorance. In modern terms, without spiritual preparation, any sacred substance becomes an ego trap. In Gnostic Christian traditions and archaeological studies, such as those by Raphael Mikulam and Sula Benet, there are suggestions of the use of cannabinoid resins and herbs in anointing oils and Templar incenses. Some scholars claim that the Cannabis mentioned in the Old Testament was, in fact, cannabis. But again, it was not recreational. It was ritualistic, liturgical, a portal to prophetic states. When used without sacredness, the plant was considered profane. In Africa and the Americas, indigenous shamanic traditions, from the Congo to the Amazon, maintain deep reverence for power plants. When present, cannabis is treated with the same respect as ayahuasca, mapacho, tobacco, or peyote. It is not the plant that heals, it is the spirit of the plant. And that spirit does not manifest without respect. In Candomblé, Umbanda, and syncretic Afro-American religions, even though cannabis is not a central element, the concept of aksay, impersonal, vital spiritual energy, also applies. Every plant has an aksay, a vibration, a purpose. Using a plant without knowing its aksay is like playing a sacred drum without knowing which oryxa it invokes. Even among the Rastafari, where cannabis is called ganja and considered the herb of wisdom, its use is surrounded by liturgy. It is smoked during reasoning sessions, spiritual reflection meetings, with chants, prayers, and meditation. The herb is a sacrament, not a pastime. Cannabis in spiritual traditions, India, Taoism, Sufism, and Rastafari. In all these traditions, the common thread is the same. Cannabis is potential. And potential is neutral. It can be a ladder or a fall, a tool or a crutch, a portal or a prison. What defines it is not the plant. It is the user, the consciousness, the intention, the preparation. Because, as the Corpus Hermeticum teaches, the spirit does not surrender to those who knock at the door drunk on themselves. And those who seek truth through shortcuts may discover that the shortcut was a vicious circle. In the end, the real question may not be, is cannabis sacred? But rather, are you sacred enough to use it? Every plant that opens portals also opens mirrors. And mirrors, contrary to what we like to believe, do not always show beauty. Sometimes they reveal what we have avoided seeing for entire lifetimes. Cannabis, like many entheogenic substances, has the potential to dissolve masks. But not every soul is ready to see its own face stripped of illusion. And that is where the true spiritual effect of the plant begins, not in the immediate elevation, but in the inevitable confrontation. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, coined the term shadow to describe the sum of the repressed aspects of our being. Not evil itself, but everything the ego refuses to acknowledge. Fears, traumas, forbidden desires, ancestral pains. In his writings, Jung affirmed that confronting the shadow is the first step toward wholeness. And isn't it curious that many people, upon smoking cannabis, experience anxiety, paranoia, or a sense of internal exposure? The plant does not create that. It merely removes the varnish of the persona, and what emerges was always there. For occult traditions, this is no surprise. In Psychic Self-Defense, Dion Fortune describes how altered states of consciousness, induced by rituals, drugs, or trauma, weaken the etheric field, making the individual vulnerable to external forces. She warns, when consciousness falters, entities from the lower regions may approach, feeding on exposed emotional cracks. This is not superstition, it is subtle psychodynamics. When the conscious mind recedes, through sleep, meditation, or cannabis, the unconscious takes over. And if that unconscious is filled with unhealed wounds, they will speak. What we call a bad trip is, most of the time, the spirit trying to cleanse the house. The tradition of Raja Yoga, especially in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, recognizes this clearly. He mentions that paranormal powers can spontaneously arise through the use of herbs, but warns, these powers are illusory if not accompanied by discernment and ethics. More than that, he says the siddhas can become obstacles to samadhi, true enlightenment, because they feed the spiritual ego, an even harder trap to detect than the common ego. Osho, in his talks on drugs and spirituality, said, "Substances open doors that only silence should open. They are shortcuts, yes, but unstable shortcuts. And often those who cross these doors without a map or guide return through the same door, now unaware of where they are." On an energetic level, cannabis acts directly on the subtle body. Many practitioners of Reiki, Kundalini Yoga, and ceremonial magic report increased sensitivity of the auric field after its use. This can be positive if the person is grounded, but when they are not, they become a beacon without a captain, emitting light that attracts not only moths, but also energetic predators. Some Amazonian shamans say, every plant that opens is a plant that tests. And the test is not mystical, it is moral. What will you do with what you see? Will you flee, analyze, act? Many chronic users report a constant sensation of stagnation. The body relaxes, but the soul stands still. Creativity seems to flow, but rarely materializes. Spirituality seems deep, but does not produce real transformation. This is what the Kabbalists call klipo, shells of energy, layers formed by unintegrated perceptions, poorly digested mystical experiences that accumulate like dust in the spiritual field. They create the illusion of growth without actual growth. And the greatest danger lies here, mistaking feeling deeply for evolving, because not every expansion is elevation. Expansion without direction is bloating, and bloating sooner or later bursts. At this point, cannabis, when used unconsciously or abusively, transforms from sacred plant into a plant of stagnation, not by its nature, but by disconnected use. It does not generate spiritual passivity, but can become the perfect setting for those who already carry it within themselves. Some try to argue, but if I feel peace, it's because it's working. But peace generated by an external agent is like the calm of a locked room, beautiful, but artificial. True peace is born even amid chaos, because it is rooted in the center of the being. If cannabis brings you peace, ask yourself, is it teaching you to generate that peace by yourself, or merely renting you a temporary illusion? The true encounter with the divine almost always begins with the encounter with the shadow, and that encounter is not pretty. No rainbows, no sepia filters. There are tears, shame, anger, confusion. But if you remain there, breathing, aware, something happens. Not a hallucinogenic revelation, but a silent integration, acceptance of what is. And from there, the birth of what may come to be. In this context, cannabis is like a water mirror. It can show you the sky, but if you dive in hastily, you will see only mud. The human spirit does not walk alone. The inner journey, no matter how solitary it may seem, is always an echo of the collective web to which we belong. No spiritual practice, no power plant, no illumination is purely individual. Everything that touches us reverberates in the culture, and everything that culture accepts or rejects shapes the way we touch each other. Cannabis is a perfect example of this. A plant with mystical roots now transformed into a global commodity, pop icon, political agenda, and symbolic currency of youthful rebellion. But long before legalization or repression, it was already part of the sacred, and in certain places it still is. In the Rastafari tradition, for example, ganja is not an addiction, it is a vow, a pact with the divine. Born in Jamaica in the 1930s, the Rastafari movement emerged as resistance to colonialism and oppression, but also as a spiritual rebirth rooted in African traditions, the Bible, and its own worldview. For the Rastas, the herb is the healing of the nations, as said in the book of Revelation. Smoking it is a sacrament, a way of drawing closer to Yah, the name they give to the living and present God. There is no banality in the act, there is reverence. The reasoning sessions, where the herb is smoked collectively while engaging in philosophical reflection, are liturgical practices. Silence, listening, words, and smoke walk together. There, the collective is the cathedral, and the plant is the incense of the spirit. But it's not only the Rastas. In the African continent, especially within Bantu traditions, there are records of the ritual use of cannabis in celebrations, funerals, and rites of passage. It was not used to forget pain, but to go through it. It was presence, not escape. It was invocation of the ancestors, not alienation. In pre-Columbian America, although cannabis was not native, the use of psychoactive plants in collective rituals was widespread. The concept remains the same. Substances that open portals, yes, but only when supported by cosmologies, myths, rituals, priests, by a collective symbolic structure. Outside that structure, the plant loses its sacredness. It becomes a mere stimulant, and that's exactly what modernity did. It took the plant from the temple and placed it on the shelf of cultural supermarkets. It turned it into meme, product, aesthetic. What was sacrament became marketing. What was vehicle became brand. The psychedelic culture of the 1960s tried to rescue this ritual value, but did so without roots, without lineage, without initiation. People listened to Alan Watts and Timothy Leary while mixing cannabis with acid and politics. It was a real search for transcendence, yes, but fragmented. Huxley had already warned in The Doors of Perception, the visionary experience can reveal, but it does not teach. It shows, but it does not structure. And the danger lies in confusing the glimpse with permanence. Western culture, by discrediting tradition, created a dangerous void, that of spirituality without ritual, of experience without ethics, of ecstasy without integration, of vision without action. Cannabis, in this context, became a symbol of counterculture, rebellion, freedom, but almost never of spiritual responsibility. That's why, in traditions where it is sacred, its use is collective. The group functions as vessel, as compass, as witness. In many Afro-Indigenous rituals, for example, no one uses the plant alone. There are songs, instruments, cycles, cleansings, limits. The collective sustains the sacred. The individual dissolves to be reborn. And here we return to the heart of the matter. Cannabis has a cultural soul. It carries all the narratives it has been wrapped in. When used in the temple, it acts as sacrament. When smoked alone in the dark room of anxious solitude, it tends to amplify disconnection. It is as malleable as water, but takes the shape of the container it is placed in. And the container of modern culture is shallow, rushed, cynical. The herb that once invoked gods is now the subject of a Netflix series. The hemp of knowledge has become an advertising pamphlet, a stand-up joke, a designer's rebellion. But there is resistance in indigenous communities that refuse the spiritual extractivism of white culture, in young seekers who are reclaiming ritual fasting and sacred songs, in silent masters who, even amid urban noise, still teach how to smoke in prayer. The plant remains the same. What changes is the context. What changes is the intention. What changes is the symbolic field that sustains the experience. And maybe deep down, this is its greatest lesson. Spirituality is not an individual feeling. It is a collective frequency. It is not what you feel. It is what you generate. It is not what you see under the effect of the plant. It is what you become after the effect passes. As the old African proverb says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go in a circle. Modern spirituality and the illusion of progress. Bring the drum, bring the fire, bring the plant. True spirituality is not measured by the altered states you experience, but by the elevated states you sustain. The path is not revealed by the lights you see, but by what you do with the shadows those lights project. Between light and mist, there is a thin line, and its name is discernment. Cannabis, like every power plant, does not carry promises. It carries possibilities. Possibilities that can illuminate or confuse, inspire or numb. And this is where the spiritual seeker arrives at a crossroads. Are they seeking to expand consciousness or escape it? Osho, often misunderstood as a hedonist, said something profoundly subtle. Anything can become meditation if you are present, and anything can become a drug if you are absent. The issue is not the plant. It is the consciousness that accompanies it. And when presence is absent, the path becomes a carousel. That's why the ancients always accompanied sacred plants with rituals, fasting, songs, silence, preparation, and guidance. Not out of superstition, but out of energetic hygiene. They knew what we forgot. A portal is not a place for tourism. It is a place of passage. And not every soul is ready for what's on the other side. Discernment, called crow in Greek philosophy, viveka in Vedanta, is the invisible blade that separates the real from mere sensation. It is the middle eye, the third eye, not as power, but as compass. And in the spiritual use of cannabis, without that compass, what seems like illumination may be just hypersensitivity. What seems like vision may be a mental echo. What seems like intuition may be disguised desire. There is a type of intoxication that disguises itself as clarity. It comes with brilliant insights, synesthesia, synchronicities. But if these insights do not change your relationship with others, with the world, with your own shadow, then they are merely spiritual fireworks, beautiful but without direction. The true path is more arid. It requires consistency. It requires presence without spectacle. It requires silence without internal noise. And that is why cannabis, used outside of a structured path, can create a much subtler addiction than chemical dependence. The addiction to the sensation of spirituality without the practice of spirituality. It is easy to seem deep under the influence of the plant. Harder is to be deep in traffic, in the bank line, in conflict with someone who hurts you. Enlightenment is not measured by what you see with your eyes closed. It is measured by what you do with your eyes open, with your feet dirty from the earth. And when there is no discernment, what cannabis does is create a foggy mirror, where the ego sees itself as awakened, when in fact it merely napped in the lap of sensations, a vegetative peace that paralyzes more than it pacifies. In traditional occultism, there is a principle known as the false light of Hod, a sensation of mental clarity that is actually just the mind intoxicated by unintegrated images, a superficial glow without roots. Cannabis, when used without wisdom, can feed precisely this illusion, the illusion of progress while walking in increasingly colorful circles. That is why the plant should only be used, spiritually speaking, when the inner soil is clean, when there is a clear intention, when there is real silence before the puff, and even deeper silence afterward, when there is guidance, tradition, method, humility, and above all, when one is ready for the answer it will give. Because as the Sufi master Hafiz said, God is like a mirror that does not laugh at your grimaces. It simply shows them clearly. Cannabis is a plant with spiritual potential, but every potential demands context, discipline, intention, and understanding. When stripped of its ritual function and turned into a cultural product, it runs the risk of becoming just another form of distraction. True spiritual seeking is a subtle art. It's not about escaping, but about staying. It's not about seeing lights, but about becoming light. What are you really seeking when you light that joint? Peace, space, silence. If you cannot find these things within yourself, perhaps the plant is merely lending you a mirror, and mirrors only show the reflection. If this video awakens something in you, share it with someone who also seeks more than smoke, someone who seeks clarity, truth, and depth. Continue your quest here on the channel. Thank you for watching.